There is a moment most people know well, the kind that happens quietly, with no audience and no dramatic music playing in the background. You wake up on an ordinary Tuesday, and something in your chest feels off. Not broken, not shattered, just stuck. You look at the routines you have been building, the small daily rituals that were supposed to move you steadily forward, and they feel hollow somehow. You made the plan, you set the alarms, you told yourself this time would be different, but the gap between who you are right now and who you imagined yourself becoming still feels just as wide as it ever did. That frustration, quiet, persistent, deeply personal, is exactly where some of the most honest writing about human transformation begins. And it is the emotional territory that two of the most widely read books on behavior and habit in recent memory explore with remarkable depth and clarity. Both books sit with that specific human ache, the ache of wanting to be different and not quite knowing where the real obstacle lives, and they take it seriously enough to build an entire architecture of understanding around it. James Clear's Atomic Habits, published in 2018, and Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit, published in 2012, together form a kind of literary and scientific dialogue about why human beings do what they do, and why changing those patterns is so much harder than it first seems. Both books have reached tens of millions of readers across the world, and their combined influence on how modern audiences think about growth and self-understanding is genuinely significant. But beneath the frameworks and the carefully structured research, both works are doing something far more literary than they first appear. They are telling a story about identity, about invisibility, and about the slow and often unseen accumulation of meaning inside an ordinary human life. One of the most quietly powerful ideas running through Atomic Habits is the distinction between outcome-based thinking and identity-based thinking. Clear explores how most people set goals focused entirely on results, lose the weight, finish the book, save the money, while the deeper and more durable shift happens when the self becomes the actual object of change. The goal is not to run a marathon, but to become a runner. That single reframe reaches far into human psychology. When a person asks not what they want to achieve, but who they want to become, something genuinely shifts at both a neurological and emotional level. Think about it. When you imagine the habits you most want to build, are you thinking about the outcome waiting at the end, or are you thinking about the kind of person you want to be in the everyday moments along the way? The difference matters more than most people realize, and this book keeps returning to that question in ways that feel less like self-help and more like careful philosophical inquiry about the nature of personal identity itself. Duhigg approaches the same terrain from a different and equally compelling angle. In The Power of Habit, the author explores what he calls the habit loop, a neurological cycle built from cue, routine, and reward that underlies almost every repeated behavior a human being performs. What makes this framework feel literary rather than purely clinical is the way Duhigg grounds it in deeply human stories. There is a woman rebuilding her life after profound loss. There are organizations discovering that small internal changes produce enormous external results. The habit loop never stays abstract on the page. It becomes a lens through which readers begin to recognize their own patterns reflected back at them with uncomfortable clarity. Duhigg observes that habits are powerful but delicate, and that observation carries real psychological weight. Have you ever noticed how a single environmental cue, the smell of coffee, the sound of a particular notification, the light at a certain time of evening, can pull you into a behavior before you have even made a conscious choice? That is the loop working silently inside you, and once you see it clearly, you cannot quite unsee it. Where these two books intersect most powerfully is in their shared insistence that transformation is never a single dramatic event. It is a process, and it is almost always completely invisible in its early stages. Atomic Habits describes what Clear calls the plateau of latent potential, the idea that meaningful change accumulates beneath the surface long before any visible result appears in the world. This is one of the most psychologically important ideas in either book. So much human suffering around habit change comes directly from comparing internal effort to external silence. You work, you show up consistently, nothing visible seems to shift, and so you stop, convinced the process itself must be broken. Clear reframes this not as a personal failure or a lack of willpower, but as a fundamental misunderstanding of how systems grow over time. The question worth sitting with quietly is this: how many things in your own life have you abandoned just before the results would have finally made themselves visible? The power of habit offers a complementary insight through its exploration of what Duhigg calls keystone habits, certain behaviors that, when changed, seem to generate a meaningful ripple effect through the rest of a person's life.
Exercise is his most frequently cited example, but the deeper structural point reaches further than any single behavior. Some habits carry more weight than others because they fundamentally reshape the conditions in which every other habit either grows or quietly withers. This idea echoes something from narrative theory, the turning point, the moment in a story where everything that follows is irrevocably altered by what came before. When Duhigg writes that lives are shaped by a handful of habits that anchor everything else, he is making a claim that feels just as true in literature as it does in behavioral science. Can you identify even one habit in your own life that carries that anchoring quality, something that seems small on its surface but holds a surprising amount of the larger structure in place? Most people can once they look, and recognizing it is the beginning of something. Both authors give serious and sustained attention to the role of environment and social context in shaping human behavior, and this is where both books step into genuinely humanistic territory. Clear writes that you do not rise to the level of your goals, but fall to the level of your systems. This is not a pessimistic observation, it is a clarifying and in some ways liberating one. It suggests that the architecture of a life matters as much as the intentions held within it. A person trying to read more, who simply leaves a book open on their pillow every morning, is working with their environment rather than constantly fighting against it. Willpower is finite and easily depleted by daily friction, but thoughtful design can be made surprisingly durable. Duhigg reinforces this from a community angle, demonstrating through multiple layered narratives that real belief, and therefore sustained habit change, tends to take root and flourish inside relationships and shared groups. The social dimension of personal transformation is not incidental in his analysis, it is structural. Does that resonate with your own experience, the way certain spaces and certain people seem to call particular versions of you into being, for better or for worse? What both books are ultimately doing, when read as literary works rather than instruction manuals, is mapping the emotional and psychological experience of becoming someone at least slightly different from who you currently are. They take seriously the interior life of the person in the middle of change, the confusion, the backsliding, the small invisible victories that no one around you ever notices or acknowledges. Atomic Habits ends with a quiet but profound suggestion that holding too tightly to a single version of yourself is its own form of limitation, because identity is always in motion and always available for revision. The Power of Habit closes with the moral weight of Duhigg's final observation that once you truly understand how habits work, you can no longer claim complete ignorance of your own patterns. That knowledge becomes a kind of quiet, ongoing responsibility. And that, perhaps, is the most genuinely literary thing either book accomplishes. It changes the reader's relationship to their own unfolding story, gently and without force, simply by offering a clearer way of seeing what was already always there. There is a particular kind of reader who picks up books like these, not because they feel broken, but because they are paying careful and honest attention to their own life. They notice the gap between effort and outcome. They feel the strange and stubborn loyalty human beings have to their own limitations, and they are looking not for someone to hand them a fixed answer, but for a framework that helps them see what is already moving inside them more clearly. Both books offer exactly that, and in doing so they earn their place not just on a self-improvement shelf, but in any honest and ongoing conversation about how human beings navigate the tender and complicated experience of becoming. Books aren't just stories, they're mirrors that help us understand ourselves better. Comment below, which book should we dive into next? If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe for more thoughtful book analysis. This video uses AI-generated audio and visuals for educational purposes only. This is just one reader's personal thoughts and interpretations.